पाकिस्तान के खिलाफ बहुत सारे महाज खुले, कुछ हमने खुद खोले और काफी सारे हमारे खिलाफ खोले गए। आज का महाज कीमत के नाम। हम पाकिस्तानी होने की कीमत चुका रहे हैं। रोज हम ये कीमत चुका रहे हैं। हजारों लोग सड़कों पे निकले हुए हैं, हजारों सार्फिन जो पेट्रोल और बिजली की कीमत के लिए अपने आप को जला रहे हैं, एक दूसरे को मार रहे हैं, एहतजाज कर रहे हैं। ये कीमत चुका रहे हैं। इमरान खान कीमत चुका रहे हैं जो 25-30 दिन से एक ऐसे केस में जो ऑलरेडी जिस पे वे इन किया गया है कि वो केस खत्म हो गया, फिर भी जेल भुगत रहे हैं। और अब एक ऐसे केस के लिए जेल भुगत रहे हैं, एक ऐसे कागज के टुकड़े के लिए जो कागज पूरी दुनिया ने ऑलरेडी पढ़ा हुआ है। तो उन्होंने जो कागज गुमाया है उसकी कीमत चुका रहे हैं, एक ऐसा कागज जो पूरी दुनिया ने देखा हुआ है। परवेज इलाही साहब कीमत चुका रहे हैं। इवन दो उन्होंने अपना केस लड़ा है, उनको फिर भी उस केस के बाद, उस रिलीज के बाद मिनटों बाद फिर से ऐसे अरेस्ट किया जैसे वो कोई दहशतगर्द हैं, किसी गली मोहल्ले के चोर हैं। वो भी कीमत चुका रहे हैं। पाकिस्तान के कम से कम 55 लाख बच्चे ये कीमत चुका रहे हैं, जिनके बारे में यूनिसेफ कहता है कि वो एक साल बाद, पिछले सैलाबों के एक साल बाद भी मुंतजर हैं, अभी तक वेट कर रहे हैं साफ पानी का। वो भी ये कीमत चुका रहे हैं। मगर ऑब्वियसली फौज के जवान भी ये कीमत चुका रहे हैं। कल 9 फौज के जवानों ने शहादत पाई और शहादत नोश फरमाई। बन्नू में उन पर अटैक हुआ और उन्होंने भी ये कीमत चुकाई। पाकिस्तानी होने की कीमत उन्होंने चुकाई। मगर एक कौम जो कीमत नहीं चुका रही, अब उसका भी वक्त आ गया है कि वो कीमत चुकाए। पाकिस्तान के जर्नल जो इस पूरे ड्रामे के पीछे हैं, ये जो 75 साल से 76 साल से चल रहा है, ये जो ट्रेजेडी चल रही है, पाकिस्तान के जर्नल भी अब ये कीमत चुकाने वाले हैं। वॉशिंगटन के जरीदे इंटरसेप्ट ने एक जबरदस्त खबर चलाई है। कल रात ही ये खबर निकली है कि जो डिपार्टमेंट ऑफ डिफेंस है, जीएचक्यू का जीएचक्यू जिसे मैं प्यार से कहता हूं, उसको बंद कर दिया जाएगा। एक नई कानून साजी के जरिए उसको रोक दिया जाएगा फ्रॉम प्रोवाइडिंग असिस्टेंस टू द पाकिस्तानी मिलिट्री। अब ये जो हेडलाइन है ये मैं पहले पढ़ूंगा ताकि आपको समझ आए कि इसका मतलब क्या है। New GOP measure would bar Pentagon assistance to Pakistan. The defense budget amendment would cut off funds to Pakistan amid an ongoing crackdown by the military establishment and its civilian allies. मुद्दा लुब्बे लुबाब के एक जो दो पार्टीज हैं, एक जो जीओपी है, रिपब्लिकन पार्टी जो है, ग्रैंड ओल्ड पार्टी जिसे कहते हैं, और दूसरी जो डेमोक्रेट्स हैं जो रूल कर रही हैं, जो मुखालिफ पार्टी है, उसने कहा है कि इनको इमदाद देना बंद करो। अब ये इस वक्त जो कानून साजी है वो एक हाउस ऑफ रिप्रेजेंटेटिव्स, जो इनकी जो नेशनल असेंबली है, उसके एक मेंबर ने अप्रोप्रिएशंस बिल में इस कानून साजी का मुद्दा पेश किया है। आज ये जो कहानी जिन लोगों ने की है, आज मैं उनके रिपोर्टर, दो रिपोर्टर्स हैं, उनमें से एक रिपोर्टर रायन ग्रिम साहब से बात करूंगा। साथ रहिए, जबरदस्त शो है, उर्दू में और इंग्लिश में, अंग्रेजी में भी बात करूंगा, फिर तर्जुमा करूंगा। सो स्टे विद मी, बिकॉज ये जो कहानी है ये इनको फोर्स करेगी कि ये बंदे के पुत्र बने। मगर जो बड़ा सवाल है कि बंदे के पुत्र बन भी जाएं, अगले आने वाले दिनों महीनों में क्या इन पे कोई प्रेशर वॉशिंगटन की तरफ से आएगा? ये आज का मेरा मुद्दा है। इंपॉर्टेंट कहानी है, वॉशिंगटन की से कहानी है, और वॉशिंगटन से मेरे साथ मुझे ज्वाइन करते हैं। आई एम जॉइंड, आई हैव द प्लेजर ऑफ इंटरव्यूइंग Ryan Grimm of the Intercept. Good morning, man. How are you? How you doing?
Good morning, Waj. How are you?
Very good. Thank you. Okay, so that was a little bit of the context of the heavy price the Pakistanis at large have been playing. Just to give you a flash course on Urdu, I started with the heavy price the economy is paying, regular folks are paying, Imran Khan is paying, his deputies are paying. Obviously, even the Pakistani military's soldiers, 9 of whom were lost yesterday, on the country's never-ending front line with Afghanistan. Even they are paying, but it seems that my premise was that the Pakistani military's leadership might be paying this price at this point with this story that you've broken. Give us the broad strokes, Ryan. What are we looking at here?
The broad strokes are that, every year the Pentagon's budget goes to Congress, for review and for renewal. And it's an opportunity for lawmakers there to kind of weigh in on issues that are pertinent to them at this moment. And so you have a number of different levels of politics that are played here. On the one hand, it's unlikely, in fact, that any appropriations bill actually is going to get enacted. And instead, we'll have a brief government shutdown at some point, probably December. And then we'll come back together and do a kind of broad appropriations bill that doesn't draw on particular legislations. That's a complicated way of saying that a lot of what's happening now is messaging. It's political jockeying. It's an opportunity for both Democrats and Republicans to say, this is where we stand on this particular issue. And you have different levels of commitment that people have. On the one hand, you could give a speech on the floor. You could issue a press release. And then above that is, I'm going to write legislation. And above that, I'm going to try to attach this legislation to this vehicle that is moving through Congress right now. And so that's what this Republican congressman from Tennessee did to kickstart the conversation. Very simple, one-line amendment that says, the Pentagon can offers no assistance to Pakistan. And it doesn't give an explanation of why. It doesn't define what assistance means. It's just a very blanket, blunt ban. And the goal is not necessarily to get it into policy in the next several weeks. The goal is to kind of kickstart a conversation in Washington, which Representative Greg Casar, a Democrat from Texas, had tried to start about a month ago, maybe 6 weeks ago, with a different defense bill. When he, pushed an amendment related to Pakistan and democratic backsliding, that did not end up getting a vote on the House floor. Kind of stopped at the stage of kind of media coverage, and so this is another attempt. So it's not as if tomorrow funds are going to be cut off for Pakistan as a result of this, but it is a signal that this is becoming an open debate in Washington.
Right. So premised on that, I am going to ask you for the triggers which are forcing this debate. Right now, your story, which you did a few weeks ago, really royal Pakistan. In fact, it's shifted the ground politically from at least under Imran Khan's feet. He is actually being tried now in what is called the cipher case. That's the cable, the diplomatic cable, which you got from what you said was a military source. Yet Khan is being tried for losing that piece of information.
But I actually have one question for you on that. I'm curious how it's playing in Pakistan. Mm-hmm. If you read the FIR, they don't charge Khan with leaking the document to the Intercept. The kind of four corners of the charges so far, at least, are related to mishandling and talking about it publicly and that sort of thing. But the timing is obviously suspicious. That the timing looks connected to the article. So in Pakistan, do people understand him to be charged with leaking it or with just kind of talking about it publicly? How does the public understand this?
Right. So he started, just to give you sort of the timeline really begins days after his ouster. Mm-hmm. And when he waived it publicly, then he's been on the record at least a couple of times saying he's lost the cipher. Mm-hmm. Right. Which is strange because then it emerges in different variations and versions, and eventually you published the abridged version, and you marked it accordingly,
right?
You sourced it accordingly. Now they're not saying that he gave it to you. They're not charging him for being your source, so to say, because he's been on the record saying I've lost it. Right? Plus, the other case that they don't have against him is that you're saying that it came from a military source. Right. He's clearly not a military source.
Right.
However, Khan does have sympathizers within the military, and there's a lot of there's a whole backstory being developed that how one of Khan's sympathizers in the military, maybe one of the officers who worked closely with him, gave it to you guys. And so at this point, it's really up to the Intercept to figure out how big it wants to go on revealing the true identity of its source. But keep in mind that his deputy, his number two, the former foreign minister, is also being charged in a similar frame, and is also in custody. In fact, his bail's recently been cancelled as well. So premised on that, what you're looking at is a abstract case of something which has been read in public. First of all, he paraphrased it. He didn't read it blow by blow and word by word. So he's paraphrased it, which is weird, that you're charging a guy for losing a piece of paper he's already revealed something about. Then another publication has already revealed what it is, but and everybody in Islamabad with two legs and a pair of glasses has read this thing, and yet you're charging this man for it. It's quite Orwellian. But I want to take this to your neck of the woods.
Sure.
Since the Intercept story, have things changed in Washington?
Yes, in the sense that I think that there is a little bit more concern about, how Washington is going to approach this. I think before the story, Washington and both parties, with some minor exceptions, were fairly comfortable to just leave it on the back burner and let it play out. The establishment now in control in Pakistan now supportive of the war in Ukraine, supportive of whatever efforts the administration might want to make with regard to Afghanistan, and just kind of the IMF is involved, which is kind of leave it at that. And yes, it does sound like there's a lot of capital flight and there's a lot of unrest and things are not going well domestically, but no, there are a lot of things are going poorly in a lot of places of the world. So Washington's happy to look the other way, in situations like that. What this has done is it has shaken that up, and it has Washington at least wondering now, okay, what is our actual role and responsibility here? You had this kind of remarkable moment a couple of weeks ago where you probably saw this, where the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, put an anodyne comment up on Twitter and said, we look forward to free and fair elections, and he congratulated somebody on something, and he got what's known as a community note, which means that there were enough people kind of who responded to that and said, but didn't you play a role in kind of destabilizing the country and undermining free and fair elections? And I think that's an unusual position for the State Department to be in, and so it's forcing at least some reckoning, some thinking, whereas before it was kind of on autopilot.
Right, got it. Okay,
doesn't mean it won't wind up in the same destination, but at least now somebody has to put their hands on the wheel.
Interesting. Okay, so I'm going to circle back to the narrative inside at Foggy Bottom, but you do mention some numbers. You had mentioned that the defense assistance to Pakistan had dwindled over the years. In fact, during the Trump administration, it had almost dried up. But after Khan's removal, you mentioned that it's back online. Now, those billions upon billions, which we saw in the early stages of the war on terror a couple of decade and a half ago, we're not seeing that, but we are seeing resumption of military assistance. Do you see a correlation between Khan's exit and the reintroduction of military assistance?
Yes, because I think a lot of it is related to cooperation around Ukraine, which, perhaps Khan would have cooperated around Ukraine, do the thing where you publicly say one thing and then behind the scenes you enable some sort of cooperation. Like that's a fairly standard way that a lot of kind of populist leaders operate with the United States around the world. So it's possible that we could have seen something like that, but we don't know because it wasn't given an opportunity. He was gone by April 2022, and we do know for sure that once the military and its allies took control following that, that cooperation, particularly around Ukraine, has really heated up, and that's been reported, and not just by us but by other outlets. I think some British papers have reported that, and maybe some Pakistani papers have alluded to it, but it's widely known. And so, like, whether that would have happened with Khan still in office is an open question. Maybe there was some diplomacy and some pressure the U.S. could have applied to him, but we do know that after he was removed, it became much easier for that alliance to kind of come back together.
Right. Now, premised on that, you also draw out a historical context to this. You have an expert in there talking about the long history between Washington and Islamabad, or should I say Washington and Rawalpindi, which is the real the real seat of power in that country, in my country. The question really is: you draw out a parallel between 1971 and the Nixon Kissinger era, and the aid, the diplomatic support, etc., which was provided to the Pakistani military, despite of its involvement in what your expert calls Operation Searchlight, which is a genocide, really, in East Pakistan. That's what it's officially being called now, more and more. It's interesting that your expert draws that parallel. Do you see that do you see a resumption of that narrative in DC, that that shouldn't be allowed again? This crackdown shouldn't be allowed again. It's pretty serious.
So there is, increasingly in Washington because there has been because the U.S. has done this so many times that it has, let's be generous and say overlooked atrocities, overlooked human rights abuses, overlooked complete cataclysms and genocides, in order to win on some other national interest or foreign policy objective, and that has then not worked out either for the victims of those human rights abuses or that genocide, or even for the U.S. national interest. That so often the overlooking, and here I'm being generous again, doesn't actually even deliver on its own terms. And so to raise, for the advocates to raise that is to say again, look, you're doing it again. You're being complicit in something that we know to be wrong, for the potential benefit of something that you don't even know is going to turn out to outweigh the costs of what we know we're paying here. So I do think people in Washington are starting to be increasingly concerned that this might not be just a kind of run of the mill couple weeks of unrest that you can kind of ignore, but might actually be something more substantial.
Right. And are you hearing anything from your sources about, in private perhaps, about how the Americans might have to draw a red line when it comes to, for example, Khan, or the system as we know it seems to be collapsing? I mean, there was a last minute bailout a couple of weeks ago by the IMF. I'm assuming Washington had something to do with that.
Yes.
So yeah, what are you hearing when it comes to not letting the world's fifth largest, critically, consistently, chronically unstable country with 200 plus nuclear weapons, the world's fifth largest military, fifth largest population, geopolitically important? I hope there's some red lines drawn, at least privately, about how Pakistan will not be allowed to sink further.
Right. And so, what I'm hearing from people who are more in the kind of, mid to high level rather than, at the very highest levels, are saying that, look, the U.S. is not going to, the U.S. is not going to let Imran Khan be executed. Now, whether or not they actually do, say something publicly about that or not, we'll see. They say it's not something that would go beyond what the State Department is saying was an internal matter, and that would make it, a cause for concern for the U.S. And so there is serious concern that there are kind of guardrails that are being pushed up against, and that there is some insistence from inside the State Department that we will make sure that these guardrails stay up, but I think they're watching in a way that where they don't really know yet where this is headed, what their capacity is, and when and how they can most effectively kind of step in.
Do you buy that?
I don't know because I think that I think it's somewhat uncharted territory. So we'll see. I don't get the sense that they have a very firm handle on the situation. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I mean, it's not uncharted territory. Let me remind
Right.
you, 1977, 78, 79, around the time you and I were babies, Ryan Grimm. We've seen this, we've seen this show before. This is not the Pakistanis' first rodeo when it comes to imprisoning and then incarcerating and then perhaps even executing a former head of state. The Americans were quiet when Zulfikar Ali Bhutto was imprisoned and then executed. And uh, this is a lot of people are drawing those comparisons between the American silence then of course Afghanistan was brewing, so they needed the military. It's unclear if they need the military now. Last question: considering your story has really shifted the ground in Pakistan, politically speaking, how do you feel about it in terms of the way it's played out? Also, a lot of colleagues in the field are saying the Intercept, if it was given a choice for a U.S. story, would the Intercept have run a single source story? And I'm asking this as a fellow colleague. Would you have run a single source story on a domestic national security issue, which is so critical, which could shift the U.S.'s political compass? But you did run it for Pakistan. How do you feel about that?
We have frequently run stories based on documents that we've obtained and that we can authenticate to a degree where we feel comfort in publishing them. So there's nothing out of the ordinary in publishing based on a document that a source provides us, that a reliable source provides us. And so it's not as if we're just going on the kind of uncorroborated word of a single individual. That we would not do. But if you have some corroborating documentation that backs up what you're saying, then we can and will and have many times kind of run stories that have shifted the ground here in the United States on that. So as for kind of the reaction to it, none of it was really surprising. It's been bemusing at times to watch some of the responses, because particularly in the beginning, before it was kind of universally acknowledged that the substance of the cipher that we published is accurate. You had all of these contradictory claims being made. That A, this is fake. B, this must be leaked by Imran Khan. You're like, well, how can both of those things be true? Like, why is either fake or there's a source for it? Like, you can't be both. And then C, that it was leaked by Khan and that's high treason. And then D, there's nothing to see here that this is a nothing burger. So like, those are also contradictory. Like, this is the greatest crime committed on the face of the planet. Also, this is nothing. It's tiny and meaningless. And it to me, it reflected a lack of kind of resilience in the intellectual infrastructure of the kind of Pakistani elite. And I refer to like the ones over here in Washington. Like, we're used to getting a lot of pushback from kind of organized sectors that we report on.
Good. Take that as a compliment.
Yeah, but rarely is it that kind of feeble and brittle and like nonsensical. Like, it, they were not sending their best, to quote Trump.
Right. So just, it should be stated though, I need to backstop you on this. The State Department has not rejected your version of the reporting. In fact, they've said, the only thing they've said, they haven't said that the cipher is inaccurate. They're saying it's being quoted out of, some of its findings have been quoted out of context. Yeah. No Pakistani foreign policy official has said that this is fake. The former foreign minister, Bilawal Bhutto Zardari, who's pretty Twitter happy, even he has not gone on and said. So nobody has said that this is fake. But last question, and I know this is a tricky one. Sources and methods are difficult to explain and divulge. But I think the people of Pakistan really need to know this, considering that a man's life is at stake here. Again, as you discussed at the top of the program, the logic which is being drawn, which is clearly flawed, is that Imran Khan gave you this document directly or indirectly to create the stir that it did. Now, can you verify that this was through, again, how did your military source approach you? Perhaps a reconstruction of the events. Did you approach them? Did they approach you? What were the incentives? How did you make this decision? I think that this could really have legal implications in Pakistan as well. So I think it's really important to weigh in at this time about your sources and methods.
Well, all of this, though, assumes that the prosecution at this point cares about the facts of whether or not he was the source. And I don't know, do you think that they care? Like, do you like they have not reached out to me and asked if I would testify in a hearing, or they haven't reached out to my colleague and asked if he would testify in a hearing. They haven't even reached out on background to ask for any kind of questions about sources or methods. You know, in general, we can't answer those questions, but maybe there's something that might be helpful. But if they wanted some information and cared about the reality of the situation and cared about the truth behind it, you would think that you would ask the people who've spoken publicly repeatedly about it. The fact that they have not done so, I think, is more confirmation of what is obvious to everybody, that they're not interested in the truth of the question. And so I'll say again that the source was not Khan, was not anybody around Khan, was not anybody in the civilian infrastructure. It was a source, from the Pakistani military side. And does that matter? Does it matter that I say this? Does it matter to the prosecution if their goal is to obtain a conviction? I think reasonable people looking at this can really question whether or not it's a kind of dispassionate investigation into the question.
Ryan Grimm, thank you. Succinct and honest. I appreciate the input. Really appreciate it, man. And thanks for doing this on a Friday morning. I know you got better things to do out in
Never. It's my pleasure.
All right. So that was Ryan Grimm, Intercept के reporter थे और कह रहे थे, मोटा-मोटा हमें बता रहे थे. I'm going to try to recap this, but बता रहे थे कि एक तो ये single line amendment है, अभी एक long shot है, अभी तक ये process नहीं हुई. ये नहीं होगा कि ये जो फौज के खिलाफ जो इधर अमेरिकी एक representative ने, House of Representatives के member ने, Republican ने ये जो स्टेटमेंट दी है, ये अमेंडमेंट कल मंजूर हो जाएगी, मगर इससे अंदाजा लगाया जा सकता है कि वॉशिंगटन में थोड़ा सा फौज के लिए जो है मूड वो बदलना शुरू हो गया है. किक स्टार्ट ऑलरेडी ये हो चुका है. महीना पहले भी कोशिश की थी एक और कांग्रेसमैन ने, ये अब उसके बाद है. दूसरा, जब मैंने सवाल पूछा कि डीसी में, वॉशिंगटन में साइफर की स्टोरी के बाद कुछ फर्क पड़ा है, तो रायन ने कहा कि थोड़ा फर्क पड़ने लग गया है. वॉशिंगटन और चीजों में इन्वॉल्व है, यूक्रेन में जंग वगैरह हो रही है, मगर डेफिनेटली आहिस्ता आहिस्ता आप देख सकते हैं इसका एक ट्रिकल डाउन इफेक्ट हो रहा है. फिर मैंने जब बात की कि एड की, रायन ग्रिम की स्टोरी में एक जबरदस्त एक इन्होंने एक्सप्लेन किया है कि जो एड है, मिलिट्री एड जो है, वो पाकिस्तान की कम हो गई थी और खान को हटाने के बाद फिर से शुरू हो गई है. इस पे इन्होंने कहा बिल्कुल ऐसा ही है. अब सवाल बनता है कि क्या अगर इमरान खान रहता तो फिर भी एड शुरू होती? क्या इमरान खान अमेरिकियों की यूक्रेन वगैरह में मदद करता? रायन ने कहा शायद करता, मेरा नहीं ख्याल करता. इमरान खान ऑलरेडी ऑन रिकॉर्ड है, उन्होंने बहुत सालों से उन्होंने कहा हुआ है कि हम दूसरों की जंगें नहीं लड़ेंगे. शायद यही मकसद था कि ये जो है ये फिर से सप्लाई करना चाह रहे थे जो ये कर रहे हैं, और शायद इसीलिए खान एक रोड़ा था जो अटका हुआ था इनके दरमियान और इनकी जो डीलिंग्स हैं वगैरह मगरिब के साथ और ये जो रूस के साथ जंग है उसके दरमियान. फिर कंसर्न्स अबाउट पाकिस्तान आर रियल इन द सेंस दैट एक और चीज इनकी कहानी में थी कि 50, 60, 70 साल से अमेरिका नजरअंदाज कर देता है पाकिस्तानी जर्नैलों की हरकतों को, पाकिस्तानी जर्नैलों के क्राइम्स को. उन्होंने जो बांग्लादेश में किया उसको नजरअंदाज किया. निक्सन और किसिंजर ने, और आज फिर नजरअंदाज कर रहा है। इस पे वो कहते हैं कि यस, ये तो अमेरिका का खानदानी पेशा है, खाली पाकिस्तान में नहीं, दुनिया के बहुत सारे ममालिक में अमेरिका ने ये हरकतें की हुई हैं, मगर अब लग रहा है कि थोड़ा बहुत ये रियलाइज करने लग गए हैं मूवमेंट देख के। इसमें मैंने पूछा इनसे, इंपॉर्टेंट सबसे आज का अहम समरी, इसमें मैंने पूछा कि क्या प्राइवेटली आपको क्या कहा जा रहा है। इन्होंने कहा कि मुझे प्राइवेटली ये कहा जा रहा है, अमेरिका वाशिंगटन में स्टेट डिपार्टमेंट के लोग कह रहे हैं कि हम इमरान खान को, हम इनको मारने नहीं देंगे, इमरान खान को एग्जीक्यूट होने नहीं देंगे। ये बहुत अहम मुद्दा इन्होंने पेश किया। मैंने जब पूछा इनसे कि इसका मतलब क्या है, ये कैसे देखते हैं, इन्होंने कहा कि इस वक्त गार्ड रेल्स खड़ी हो गई हैं। गार्ड रेल वो चीज होती है जो रोड के साइड पे लगती है, पहले नहीं थी, अब खड़ी हो गई हैं, और ये थोड़ा सा कंसर्न हो गए हैं जिस तरीके से फौज और इस्टेब्लिशमेंट आगे क्रैकडाउन कर रही है। तो इमरान खान को अमेरिका, इमरान खान की को फांसी अल्लाह ना करे, या किसी और को भी, उनकी पार्टी में जो भी है, अमेरिका कहने लग गया है कि हम फांसी नहीं देने देंगे। इस पे मैंने फिर भुट्टो साहब का इन्हें रिमाइंड करवाया, क्योंकि राय ने कहा कि ये अनचार्टेड टेरिटरी है। मैंने कहा नहीं, ये चार्टेड है, हमने पहले ये देखा है। अमेरिका चुप था जब भुट्टो साहब को फांसी लगी थी, क्या इस बार चुप रहेगा या नहीं, सवाल बनता है। आखिरी सवाल जो था वो ये था कि क्या आपकी जो सोर्स है, वो जो फौजी सोर्स है, जो कह रहे हैं कि इमरान खान ने दिया है ना इन्हें, यही इनका बयानिया यही है कि इमरान खान ने और शाह महमूद कुरैशी ने इंटरसेप्ट को साइफर दिया है ताकि ये दुनिया के सामने दिखाएं। बयानिया तो यही बन रहा है, मगर ये कह रहे हैं कि एक तो इमरान खान ने नहीं दिया, एक फौजी ने दिया है। मगर वैसे भी हमें किसी ने अप्रोच नहीं किया, क्योंकि ये जो हैं और इनके जो प्रोसिक्यूटर हैं वो इंटरेस्टेड ही नहीं है कि सच क्या है, उन्होंने खाली खान को कन्विक्ट करना है। ये आज का मोटा मोटा जो है मुद्दा था। मगर जो मेरे लिए जो एक बड़ी कहानी है वो ये है कि रायन ग्रिम, जिन्होंने साइफर वाली स्टोरी की मुर्तजा हुसैन साहब के साथ कुछ हफ्ते पहले, वो कहते हैं कि ये जो इंटरनल मैटर वाला जो वक्त है, इंटरनल मैटर वाला वक्त अब चला गया है, और अब अमेरिका थोड़ा गौर फरमाने लग गया है। और उस गौर फरमाने में इधर से उधर से, इधर से एक कांग्रेसमैन, उधर से एक ट्वीट, उधर से विक्टोरिया न्यूलैंड की मीटिंग, ये अब जलील अब्बास जिलानी के साथ, जिधर उन्होंने फिर से इलेक्शन की बात की। हफ्ते 10 दिन पहले एंटनी ब्लिंकन ने भी इलेक्शन की बात की। मैं कहता हूं ये एफ वर्ड है, फ्री एंड फेयर इलेक्शन की बात की। अब क्या अमेरिका इंटरेस्टेड है फ्री एंड फेयर इलेक्शन करवाने में? एक तरफ से तो इनको इमदाद जो है वो देता है, दूसरी तरफ फ्री एंड फेयर इलेक्शन क्यों करवाएगा अमेरिका? तो ये सवाल है। मगर ये जो मेन सवाल था, आज मुद्दा हमारा था कि शुरू हो गया है फिर से वॉशिंगटन में एक कहानी शुरू हो गई है कि इनकी इमदाद बंद करो। जब शायद इनकी इमदाद बंद हो, तो जैसे हमारी जो थीम थी आज कि हम सब कीमत चुका रहे हैं, तो शायद इन्हें भी कीमत चुकानी चाहिए। ये जो है इस पे शायद इन्हें खुदा का खौफ आए, बिकॉज और किसी तरीके से नहीं आएगा। That was my show today. Share, like, subscribe, comment, support independent journalism. मेरा membership program join करें, अपना ख्याल रखें। पाकिस्तान जिंदाबाद।